Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf and to a kind of, I think, new series of videos about my favorite books in certain categories. I mean, there are a lot of bookish YouTubers who make these favorite videos, my 5 favorite novels of all time. And I don't think I ever made one of those. And when I was thinking about the channel at the beginning of the year and what I want to do, I'm not gonna, I will keep the stuff that I really like doing, like the tops and flops, and of course the author spotlight. But I also like it to come up with something new for a year, to have something that I came up with in that particular year. Does that make sense? And so I thought, why not do a series of videos about favorites in certain genres or categories, and the category can be huge, like classics, or it can be small, like crime books set on an island. And I will, come up with them in regular intervals, maybe once a month or something. I don't know yet. And if you have certain categories or genres that you would like me to talk about my favorites, leave a comment, leave the suggestion in the comment. But because it's February and because it's Black History Month, I thought I'll kick off this new series with my 5 favorite fiction works by female authors, US authors, 20th century. That limits it a little bit, 5 favorite Black books by Black authors. I don't think I could limit my favorites to 5, but in this category I can. And I'll start off with Gwendolyn Brooks, which is a bit unusual for me because it's poetry. And I don't talk about poetry often. I don't read poetry that often anymore, I have to admit it. But there are still some poetry collections that I absolutely cherish. And Gwendolyn Brooks's collections are in that category for sure. The picture here is a collection, a collected poems, but the one that I think it was the first one that I read when my English was sufficient so that I could read poetry in English, is the Annie Allen collection. I think that's the name of the collection as well. Yeah, Annie Allen. And Gwendolyn Brooks won the Pulitzer Prize in 1950 with that collection, and she was the first Black woman to ever win the prize for that category. And she was born in 1917, by the way, if you're interested, and she died in 2000. And I think she was fantastic. Annie Allen and her mother feature in the collection called Annie Allen, and she talks about the regular life of Black people in the US and the difficulties that they face in the 1940s. In that collection, so it's very realistic poems in a very expressionist, not expressionistic, but expressive language. I love it. I learned a lot about Black lives from her poetry. So if you have never read Gwendolyn Brooks, try a smaller one, maybe the Annie Allen collection, but I think all her work is just fantastic. So that is my first fiction favorite. I just group poetry into fiction. There are probably people screaming at me now that there should be a separate category of poetry collections, but I'll just group it into fiction. And so is the next one, because it's a play. Yes, you heard that correctly, a play. And that is not featured. Plays are not featured on my channel that often either. But this one, when I first saw it in a German translation, I have to admit, because I saw it in Germany when I was in my teenage years, A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry. It's from 1959, if I remember correctly, but just to make sure, I will check that. Yes, 1959. And Lorraine Hansberry, unfortunately, died when she was very, very young. She died when she was in her 30s, and I'm not getting this document from the screen. So she was born in Yes, now it's gone. Sorry about that. She was born in 1930 and she died in 1965. Some form of cancer. I think pancreatic cancer, if I remember correctly. So that is horrible, first of all, in general. But I just imagine what she would have written if she had lived. Anyway, so she was a playwright, a journalist, an activist, and A Raisin in the Sun is about a family. Younger is they are called. I mean, not they're called. That's their last name. So you have Mr. and Mrs. Younger and their son, and they live in the Chicago suburbs. And it's about it's sort of similar theme as in the poetry, the Gwendolyn Brooks poetry, trying to make life in the racially segregated Chicago suburbs, and what it means to be a Black person in the 1950s in the US. And it's so powerful, the language, but also the story. I will forever remember the first time I saw this play. So if you haven't read A Raisin in the Sun, please read it, because it's just absolutely fantastic, and it deserves a place in my all-time fiction favorite by Black authors of the 20th century. For the next one, number 3, and by the way, these 5, I'm just doing them in chronological order, publication date, so it's no ranking within those 5s, just, as a side note. But we're going slowly to more familiar territory. It's a novel in interconnected stories about 7 women, and that's Gloria Naylor's book, The Women of Brewster Place, which was published in the 1980s. 1980, let me check, 1982, yes. I looked that up before I filmed, and then I forgot right away whether it was 82 or 83. Anyway, so Gloria Naylor was born in 1950, and she died, unfortunately, also relatively young in 2016. And this was her debut novel. And it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, that somebody could write her first book so brilliantly is beyond me, but it's not good for a debut. It's an excellent book, whether would have been a debut or the 100th novel by somebody. So it's set in that Brewster Place, in a city apartment complex, dilapidated, and it's about 7 women. And they each all living in Brewster Place, and they each get their own story, but they also feature in the stories of other women. And together, I'm always with interconnected short stories or interconnected stories, whether in the end you call it a novel, but it doesn't really matter. It really doesn't matter. It's so extremely, extremely powerful what we learn about the life of these women from very different backgrounds in terms of what they do or what kind of life they had, whether they had family or whether they are single or, what kind of work they do. But they all had to face hardship in various degrees and to various degrees of violence also. Yeah, it's a fantastic book. It's extremely did I say powerful? Yes, I did say powerful. And the life of these women, it's so vivid, and the language is so beautiful is maybe not the right word, but the language really serves the stories. I think it's a absolutely incredible book, and like all the 5 books, otherwise it wouldn't be in my favorites. I can highly recommend it, so I don't have to say that, but I'm still saying it. Read it if you haven't read it yet. The next one is also fiction, but speculative fiction. 1987, so it's a little later, and that's, you're not surprised, probably, Octavia Butler, Dawn. I'm rereading it because one of my other projects that I will certainly continue for this year is rereading at least 1 or 2 books a month. And Dawn, Black History Month, I thought was a perfect reread for February. This is the first in a series. It says a Lilith Brood novel. There are 2 names for the series. I don't know why. One is Lilith Brood, because Lilith is one of the main character in this book, main characters, and the other is the Xenogenesis series. And maybe that word was too difficult, so they gave it a second name, but doesn't matter. I like the series, but the first book I thought was just absolutely brilliant. It's set in the future where mankind finally achieved what we are trying to do, we have been trying to do for quite a while, is you make the world completely uninhabitable, and most humans die. Nuclear something. But there is this foreign species, the Onkali, and they save a couple of human beings that are still alive when, the war and everything happened. And Lilith is one of them. And then you learn what the Onkali are like as a species, what they want in return for making the earth habitable again, for saving the human beings. It's a fantastic story just as a dystopian sci-fi, but it's about more than that. It's about the question that Octavia Butler obviously asked herself as a Black American: how can we live as a formerly enslaved group of people? How should we approach our former enslavers? What about colonialism? How do we deal with that? So those are the topics that were in her mind when she wrote this book, but she made it into a story that is just living on its own, and I think it's fantastic. So yeah. And then the last one, the 5th one, was published in 1995 by Dorothy West, The Wedding. It wasn't published by her, it was written by her and then published by the publisher. Anyway, sorry about that. Dorothy West, The Wedding. And if you think of Harlem Renaissance, you think of Zora Neale Hurston, but Dorothy West was one of the most prominent members of the Harlem Renaissance and the longest living. She was born in 1907 and she died 1998. And this book was one of her last books, published 1995, but set in the 1950s. And it is about a different segment of Black life. It's about the Black bourgeoisie. A wedding, a lush setting, Martha's Vineyard, and family gathering, and of course plot and drama ensues. But I thought I liked the different approach to what she wants to talk about. Dorothy West, I like a lot of her work, and I chose this one as a favorite because it's later work and it's still kind of part of the Harlem Renaissance, even though it was published in 1995 and it's situated in the 1950s. And if you're thinking Martha's Vineyard, you're not immediately think of a Black family having a wedding there. And that and the contradictions of a Black bourgeois life, people who made it, but not really, because they're still Black and they're still discriminated against, no matter how well they are established and how much they are part of the, bourgeoisie and they have good jobs and money. So that is the friction of that kind of life really comes across very well. And I love her writing. I think I think in my previous video I said something about Toni Morrison, that I'm not one of the few people that's just not. And I have the same with Zora Neale Hurston. Not everything works as well, and especially if she is writing in vernacular or dialect, or it's not her fault, it's mine. I'm not a native speaker, and reading dialect in English is for me very difficult to understand, but also to enjoy. So anyway, but Dorothy West, I think she was a genius, absolutely. And The Wedding is definitely one of my favorite books and should be included and was included in the 5 favorite fiction works by Black female authors of the 20th century. And that was the last one. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said earlier, if you have certain categories or genres or themes that you would like to see a favorite video from, I don't know whether that sentence made sense grammatically, but you know what I mean. Let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to your comments no matter what anyway, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.